Oh,
Yeah.
thank you. Okay, so I guess that's what I guess you can't share. You can't share a screen when like you have to record first. So that's what we learned today. Okay, what are you seeing now for screens, guys?
The like minimized version.
Okay, now do you see, what do you see?
Bigger, but we can still see the next slide.
Okay. We're getting there. Ta-da! I think we got it now. Got it now?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you see my face?
Yep.
I must be in the corner or something. Okay. All right. Welcome everybody to Following a Family down their road of navigating a special needs diagnosis. So these are my little lovely kids there. This photo is quite old. But we have myself and my husband, and then on the left we have Madison. Madison is 11 now. No, she's 14. And she was diagnosed with fetal alcohol syndrome at the age of probably like between 8 and 10ish, I think. And then the twins in the middle, they have Rubinstein-Taybi syndrome, and they're identical. So that's why they look the way they look, identical. If you'll notice in Emmeline's photo there, do you see how she's on the left? Emmeline's on the left. She's grimacing. Do you see that grimace? So that is very well known as an RTS trait. They grimace. So that's her smile, but it comes across as a grimace because they have very poor control of their kind of like their lips and in terms of like speaking, right? Because they're nonverbal. A lot of times they never speak because they can't get the coordination of their mouth muscles. So Emmeline is a little tomboy. She's like a little mischievous. And then Caitlin is a princess. And that's exactly what their personalities are. And then my daughter, Kayla, she had a diagnosis of an eating disorder in grade 8. And she lived in patient treatment for a year and then went to outpatient for a year. And then I have King Cable there on the right, and he recently got a diagnosis of ADHD and he is gifted. So I have 5 diagnoses for 5 kids. So sort of this is my story, and I'm very happy to share it because when Chris was, when the twins were born and Chris was a single dad, he didn't have any support. So Caitlin and Emmeline were born, and it was a surprise when they were born that they were diagnosed with Rubinstein-Taybi syndrome. And they, when they were diagnosed, you know, the babies are born by cesarean, and mom was sedated. And the doctor said, oh, here you go. Oh, looks like these babies have RTS, short for Rubinstein-Taybi syndrome, and handed the babies over and walked away and left my husband to go Google and found the most horrific pictures and photos and outcomes, basically. So horrific experience for him. And this is a very typical experience in a hospital. You know, doctors don't have the bedside manner. And so then the parents, some of them are lucky enough to get support depending on who the physician is, but many of them don't. And so then they have to navigate a diagnosis. Other people, of course, you know, get diagnoses later. But what I want to bring up from a counseling perspective is regardless whether they get a diagnosis, parents get a diagnosis at birth or later, we talk about in counseling about shattered assumptions. You heard that term before? So when you get a devastating diagnosis like this, I mean, some parents are like, oh, I love my Down syndrome kid. I would never, you know, feel any different. But the reality is that many people, you know, their dreams about, certainly my husband's dreams about what he thought of having his first child, what that would look like. His assumptions about the world were shattered and his dreams were shattered. And so there's a lot of confusion and there's a lot of grief. And I want to talk about, if I ever went to go on to do my thesis, I would probably do my thesis on not only what does it look like in terms of grief for mom and dad, what does that look like for grandparents? What does that grief look like for the siblings? Right? So all of the extended family and those pieces, right? That support system in terms of all the dreams that they have for these little babies. And in a world where you're supposed to accept all neuro diverse babies and kids. So where is that place? Do they have that place to be able to say, I'm like devastated that my child has Down syndrome, right? Because it's not acceptable to talk about that in the world, particularly with men. Men have, it's challenging for them to admit sometimes that their children, that there's something wrong with their child. And then also look at it from a cultural standpoint, because many different cultures, Asian cultures often don't acknowledge any sort of anything wrong with the child. I mean, I think most of you have probably covered this in your multicultural classes. There are many cultures that don't acknowledge anything but perfection. So that's something very important. I'm so grateful that we are changing, as a human race. And we'll see, people are talking more openly about diagnoses, and that we are all the same but different, right? There's nothing wrong with us just because we have a diagnosis. We just learn different, or we're different. We have, some people have 10 toes, some people have 11 toes. But typically what will happen is, there'll be the experience where the doctor just walks away and nothing happens. But typically what would happen in an acute care setting, in a hospital setting, is they would send in some sort of social worker. And that social worker with the team, the medical team, they might do some genetic testing. Actually, it was quite interesting for Caitlin and Emmeline at that time, genetic testing. Some was available, but they could actually not determine at that time that Rubinstein-Taybi, that it was Rubinstein-Taybi. It could have been Pfeiffer syndrome or Rubinstein-Taybi. I will tell you a story later, 10 years when I had my son, that in the 10 years, the genetic testing had improved, and we could actually determine through blood tests that Caitlin and Emmeline do have a Rubinstein-Taybi syndrome. So huge advances in technology, and I'll tell you how that happened later. If you're lucky, you'll get a referral to a local pediatrician. Typically, there's not so much of a long wait list because it's more of an emergent situation, and many pediatricians really have a love or who specialize in sort of infant diagnosis. Dr. Ward here in Langley, he's a pediatrician and he's amazing. And he actually only takes on referrals now for these types of cases. So just keep his name in mind if you ever get referrals in Langley. Dr. Bamber is a pediatrician and she does kind of the whole gamut, but a lot of the referrals from the hospital go right to Dr. Ward in Langley now. Then you could get a referral to the local MCFD. So that's the child development. So it's the arm of MCFD where social worker is given, like, how they have protective services and they have different arms, but this one is, it's for special needs kids. I can't remember the offhand, but there's this particular name. It'll probably come to me later in the later slides. So usually that gets assigned. And so it's actually easier if you get a diagnosis at birth because all this stuff comes, right? It's later on, if you get a diagnosis later on, where a lot of kids get like an autism diagnosis and they don't know. They're supposed to contact Ministry of Children and Family Development, like ask for a social worker for that department, and then ask for resources. But it's not just people, like, sadly, our system doesn't tell parents to do that. And then you hopefully would get a referral to your local child development center. So in Langley, it's called the Langley Child Development Center. I believe they just changed their name to Inclusion BC, but you might see advertising for both of them, both names. And of course, I had to put on my last slide here is a referral to a family therapist, right? That would be ideal if people got counseling right away. So that would be my hope. Oh, look at that. I'm a slide ahead. I see what's happening. Sorry, guys. Do you want me to go back so you write notes? I just talked about the whole slide. I thought it was my notes on the side. I was like, oh, this is cool. Okay, so MCFD, the social workers that help with these kiddos that get diagnosed, again, birth or later, they would make the referrals for different programs. They're funded ministry programs. One would be the at-home program. The at-home program, I'm just going to skip forward here for a second. I'm going to go into more detail. Okay, so just as an overview, there's the at-home program, which is a program to help get medical supplies and services to little ones that require a lot of care or a lot of particular therapy. They would also make referrals for respite services. They might help attend preschool and early child development meetings with with childcare centers. They would help with IEP meetings in the school. They would help with referrals to the child development centers, pediatricians, early intervention programs, and I just put the local contact for the MCFT office. So they're basically the gatekeeper, and you can't get into any of these programs unless the social worker actually does the referral and puts you in touch with the different program. In terms of early intervention programs, some of the services that are offered are occupational therapy. So that'd be OTPT. So for example, maybe a child who has mobility issues would need some occupational therapy. Physiotherapy, speech and language pathologists. There are not very many available, but some do private practice. We have one here at our clinic. Of course, Yanita is amazing. They would also give you some access to autism funding, which would be like behavioral interventionists. So they could connect you with a behavioral consultant, and then you would have a behavioral intervention, perhaps put a behavioral intervention team together. So that's called early childhood intervention. And the autism program currently, which is going to be disbanded in a year, gives $22,000 to kids under 6 and $6,000 for kids over 6 for intervention. There could be a referral to a community brain injury program in the area, and they also might help with the child development centers often do screening and referral and assessment. So if, let's say, your kiddo went to preschool and the preschool teachers were like, oh, something's up, like, just behaviorally, they noticed something, then they would actually be able to, you would ask for a referral from an early child development center, and they would send somebody to the daycare and do an observation and then make recommendations. The idea behind that is so that between the ages of like 3 to 6, that they identify if there's going to be challenges before the child hits the public school system in kindergarten, grade 1. And they may provide some family education and support. So they may have like the Langley Child Development Center, Inclusion BC, in the past have done parenting classes, or they might have a support group. Every single city has a child development center. So there's one in Surrey, there's one in Langley, like there's one everywhere, and it is funded through the government. And I believe it's funded through MCFD, but they're all called different things. They would also arrange for maybe some individual and some group therapy, depending on if they have funding. So that might be some free counseling there. They might put some monies towards equipment, like, so if you need a wheelchair, various different prescriptions, like say a child was diabetic, they might put some stuff towards that. They might actually work with you. There's various different charities and organizations that do medical equipment loans. So for example, if your child was having a surgery and they only needed a wheelchair for like a few months, and that, Red Cross does stuff like that. They might help with transitional planning. So that again would be like going from preschool to kindergarten. And I just put a website there, and that's just a resource in terms of navigating early childhood and the different services. So I just put that link there for you guys.
Can I ask a question, Lisa?
Yeah.
About the disbanding of the funding, what is the deal with that?
Who's talking to me?
Julia.
Hi, Julia. You're
Hi.
seeing my screen here. So basically, this is my personal opinion. Okay, so it's not necessarily true, but originally the autism program, so they give you, they give the 22 and the 6,000 over 6, but they only give it for autism. So when Madison was diagnosed with fetal alcohol syndrome, I spent all this money on a diagnosis, and then she got diagnosed, and I'm like, okay, let's go. Come on, what can we do? There was nothing. There's no therapy. There's nothing. Only autism gets funding. So basically the government's saying, well, that's not fair. We should be giving funding to some kids who have Down syndrome, or some kids who have ADHD, or some kids who have like chronic medical conditions. And so that's how they're positioning it. But basically they're saying, okay, we're going to give this money now to like everybody. And then, but we don't know how we're going to give out the money. We haven't decided that yet, but what we are going to tell you right now is that we're taking all the money away from you guys for those little kiddos that already have autism and have the funding program set up. We're going to take that away from you. And in 2023, so they announced it in November of 2021, and they're like, but don't worry, it's not happening till January 2023. So they kind of, you see how they bamboozled everyone, because they said it's like, made it seem like 3 years from now, but it was really like 14 months. So now everybody's like, what do you mean you're taking away the autism program? Like what's gonna, what are we getting instead? Like, I do understand you need to give money across the board to everyone. It's not fair that only autism kids gets funding. But their answer was, well, we don't know what that looks like yet. So from my perspective, and I'm a little bit jaded because this presentation is created out of love, because it's a labor of love, because I had to fight for all of this for my kids, right? I'm presenting it to you so that because nobody knew about it. Like, I walked into the twins' life when they were 3, and Chris didn't know about any of this. None of this was set up, and I had to fight to get all these programs for them. And that's why I'm teaching and advocating for you guys to know about it. So why would you make a huge announcement? And the announcement went to every single parent who MCFD had as part of this. It's the CPSY program. That's what it's called, the special needs, the MCFD special needs. I'm not saying the right word, but anyway. So if you were to make this huge announcement, then why wouldn't you have had a plan and said, well, this is how we're going to do it. This is how it's going to work. They didn't. They said to be determined. We don't know. It hasn't been talked about. We have to talk about, so they basically, I believe that they're just cutting the program to save the money. And the reason why is because so many children are being diagnosed with autism. Is it because of education? Is it because we are more educated? Is it because there's more awareness? Or is it because this stat came from Dr. Warling, who's a psychologist in Vancouver, as part of the Sunny Hill team to diagnose? He told me personally that 1 out of 5 boys in the province of BC is being diagnosed with autism right now. So what does that mean if your government has a program and they, all these kids are now being diagnosed? When you talk about budgets, right? So all of a sudden, maybe there was like 3,000 kids, and now there's 12,000 kids. Well, 9,000 times 6,000, right? So you get where I'm. So to answer your question, Julia, which is to not answer your question, was it you, Julia?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't have an answer, but I feel that that's what they're doing. And if you talk to the community, the autism community, they also feel that. So if you look on the chat boards and on the Facebook pages, that's what everybody's talking about. So, so this presentation will be outdated very soon. But we'll just work with what we have for now. Okay, so the at-home program, basically nobody gets, because they make it as difficult as they can for you to get. I will premise, this presentation by saying, in my office, I have a binder. Can you see the binder? And it has tabs, and it has all the different programs and all the different paperwork and printouts. So you should pop by my office and ask me to look at it, or ask Leanne for it. Just, it's blue. It's obvious. This is the color. And it has all of this stuff and all of the application forms to sign. So there's a manual that's associated with this presentation. And so at home programs, so what they do, actually, that's what I was getting at. Hold on a sec. So essentially with the at-home program, you need to prove that basically in certain areas like feeding and eating and dressing and toileting, that they could not do it themselves. Absolutely could not do it themselves. And if you can prove that your child needs an enormous amount of help and spends a lot of time doing these things, that they need help, then they would qualify for the program. But the assessments, the way they do it, it would be they make it so that maybe say out of, I'm guessing here, but just give an example, say 2,000 people apply, maybe only 20 would get it, because it's the worst of the worst of the worst. So it's a great program, but it's very hard to get. So a lot of children with Down syndrome don't get it because they're too high functioning. or a lot of autistic kids don't get it because they're too high functioning. Now with the twins, because at that time, so developmentally, because Chris applied for the at-home program when they were like infants, like maybe under two-ish, because their developmental delays were so profound, and because they were so young, they weren't meeting those milestones. So they couldn't sit up by themselves by 2 years old. They were still lying. So they got the program approved. But if they were to apply for that same program, so if they got their diagnosis at 10 and applied for at-home program, they wouldn't have got it. Because we spent thousands of dollars on behavioral interventions to teach them how to use a fork. So you know what I mean? I get it. They don't want to give the funding away, but it can be a huge, huge help, because the idea is like, it's for basically people that really need full-time care, right? That these kiddos just, need everything done for them. And so the services that they approve would be respite, because parents need a break, medical equipment, biomedical equipment, medical supplies. So Caitlin and Emmeline, they still get diapers. So they were incontinent for most of they're 18 now. And but it's funny, so they have so they got diapers until they were in diapers till they're at least 12, I think. So now they're hitting 18, and I called them and I said it's called Product Distribution Center that supplies, and I'm like, okay, well, can I get them like pads, right, for their menses? Because let me tell you, it's not pretty. It's not pretty with 3 of them on their period at one time. And clearly they need help to change their pad and whatever. And so the lady kind of giggled at me, and she says, I'm sorry, but they only cover incontinence supplies. So I'm like, well, aren't pads, like, we use pads if we have, or like not maxi, like thin pads, right? Anyway, so what she did was she ordered me these, she says, well, I can order you, like, they're not diapers, but they're called diapers, but they're like the huge pads, like exorbitant plus times plus. So she ordered them for me, and so we're using them at night for them because it's like a diaper. But I thought that was really interesting. Nope, they would pay for diapers, but they won't pay for pads. I don't know how that's much different, but she said that's a normal woman bodily function. So, but she was cool because she got me at least some supplies. Or orthotics and splints, audiology equipment, so if they have hearing issues, and then speech therapy is covered. And so until the girls were 18, they also got their massage therapy and chiro. They got speech. We don't there's a bunch of different services, and again, I've got pamphlets, and I'll send you some attachments that has all this. But so they did get like $1,800 a year for speech therapy. And then they got another, I think, $1,500 for massage, but they only got $30 per session. Massage is $120, but it helps. And some therapists will be creative and help utilize those dollars in a way that makes sense, if you know what I'm saying. I'm not going to say more than that on a recording, but I think you can read between the lines. So they also cover some dental, orthodontic, and optical. Let me tell you, you have to send 15 emails to follow up. And when they do, they cover like the weirdest stuff. But I was persistent, and they did pay a portion of Caitlin and Emmeline's braces. I had to work with a dentist that would take the MCFD funding. Then also the same thing for glasses. It was a fight, but they did cover a little bit of it. Caitlin and Emmeline have never had to pay for MSP, but I don't think any of us pay for MSP anymore. Most of the drugs are not covered because that's where PharmaCare plan works, but they did have some medications that were covered. And then I just have another link here about some resource in terms of behavior development and special needs. So there's some resources that they offer on their website. And okay, so this is just a quick, I won't go too much into it. So they're available up until 18, like I talked about. There also is respite available. So there's 2 different types of respite. There's like regular respite through MCFD, and then there's the at-home respite. So we were fortunate, we got 2 respites, and I believe it was like $200 a month for each of them. It's not a lot, but it's something. It helps parents. And so remember how I said how you had to meet the criteria? So that's what it's talking about here. They have to be assessed as dependent in at least 3 of 4 functional activities of daily living: eating, dressing, toileting, and washing. Or they're palliative, or they need direct nursing support. Wow. Huh. Sorry, Julia, I'm talking, you see it says Duchenne muscular dystrophy?
Yeah.
That's that when we were in the medium yesterday, that was my cousin who died from that, and he died at 14. I do have somebody here at the clinic, actually, I know that has that same diagnosis. Muscular dystrophy is like really very rare, like super rare. So that's funny that they would identify that one particular ailment or disease. Okay, this just goes on about this. Okay, so do you guys know much about autism funding? Okay, again, I'm not going to spend too much time on it because the whole system's changing this year. But I talked about the 22,000 and I talked about the 6,000. The reason why that the 22,000 is so much higher is because the idea is that if they give early intervention for a lot of money towards that, that could, and it has been, there's been a lot of research and statistics that have shown that having early childhood behavioral intervention, they can give them the support that they need so that then when they basically get school age, a lot of those behaviors could dissipate or be less or be negligible. And then the reason why it's only 6,000 after 6 is because the school district is supposed to pay for all of the services and the therapy, which doesn't happen. But that's the idea. It's like one ministry, it works until they're 6, and then it's supposed to fall under our legislation that the school district is supposed to provide the speech therapy and the OTPT and the counseling and all that stuff. So, and as you know, that's where the first cutbacks are in OTPT speech therapy. Caitlin and Emmeline, they don't even talk. They're like nonverbal, so they'd be the highest need. And every year in the school district, they would to keep me quiet, they would give me speech therapy for the first term, and then the second term they'd be like, oh, just so you know, like they had their first term, we have to give it to other kids. And I'm like, I don't care. That is my right. I pay my taxes, and you have the legal obligation to ensure that my child's needs are met, and you will give me speech therapy for the entire year. So that was a battle, but that's what we do as parents and advocates for our kids. So that is the reason why there's the disparity in the funding model. I'm not going to speak too much about the kids under the age of 6 because that won't fall under your purview and it's going to go away. So there are certain services that are covered under age 6, which counseling is not. Over the age of 6, counseling is, and counseling is covered for family therapy. That's why when we talk about the autism program and we, let's say, use a child's autism funding for the parent, it's because it's family therapy and the parent needs just as much counseling as the child. So, but the funding still, like the supplier justification form and the budgeting of the funding goes in the child's name, even though the parent's being seen. Just so that you guys know, I talked to Shannon Lawrence today. Nancy, I talked to her and I suggested that she do a Zoom presentation and do it and record it on how to do all the paperwork for the autism funding and for the charities. So I told her, Nancy, that you're going to approach her and either she'll do one-on-one with you, or I suggested that she maybe do it sort of as a workshop and maybe send out an email. And if you guys want to come and do it all together, or she might be able, she's pretty good, right? She might be able to actually show you everything on Zoom. So I guess that's part 2 of this presentation. So please reach out to Shannon Lawrence. You'll find her email on Jane, right? You just go into her profile, send her an email if you want to learn how to fill out the paperwork.
I will. Thank you.
Yeah. And as an intern, you should still learn to fill it out, right? Because even though maybe your clients are still paying $40, but if we could get it covered through a charity, then we should.
I just have a question, sorry, Lisa.
Yeah.
So these are for the funding for 6 to 18-year-olds. What if we have clients and their families that are 18 and over that have autism?
Well, guess what? because my children just turned 18, right? So I called them. I called my CLBC, which is the organization that so Ministry of Family, MCFD hands them over to CLBC. It's
Okay.
still MCFD, but it's called CLBC. And so I asked my transition coordinator about whether they could continue their speech therapy because they're still nonverbal.
Mhm.
And you know what? Imagine miraculously at age 18, I guess they now can talk. They got a magic and they can talk because they don't get any more speech therapy. So everything stops at 18.
Mm-mm-mm.
No therapy. I asked about occupational health, OTPT, because she sees a physiotherapist once a week because she has some mobility issues. No, they don't have any funding for that. And they cut off their speech. They cut off everything. So now, I mean, I'm just starting this process. So this presentation will continue. What happens to a family after 18? And I'm just learning that process myself right now. But a very good question, Amy. Yeah. So basically they're magically cured. Not only are they magically cured, but we also have to prove that they still special needs. So I had them totally assessed by CLBC. Well, I had to pay able to do an assessment. I've had to pay for it as a parent, several $1,000s times 2. And then, yeah, I had to prove that they needed a care provider. So it's like starting all over again. It was funny because when I did the assessments, they were like, well, let's talk about what life looks like. Let's do a vision board. Let's talk about what kind of job that they can have. And I'm like, no, let's talk about who's going to change their period pads. Let's talk about who's going to get them showered at night. I'm really not interested in finding out, you know what, like doing this vision board about what their life could look like. I want to know how their basic needs are going to be met. And so CLBC, they were like quite shocked at my approach. And I said, we'll talk about what their life looks like after you figure out, you give me an assessment and you attach funding to that assessment.
Yeah.
And I figure out where they're going to live and how they're going to live in this economy and pay rent and have a caregiver. Then we can talk about, you know, them going to like work at A&W or, you know, work at a community center or whatever. So you can see I'm really passionate about that. You triggered me there.
I was also wanting to, so the applications that you were talking about with Sharon Lawrence,
Yeah.
are those for folks that are also over 18? Like, are we able to support, or is it just under 18? Hey, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, and then so we'd be looking at like charities, I guess, or
Yeah. So CW and Variety Club,
okay.
They give money towards, basically some of them do behavioral intervention, some do speech therapy, some do counseling, but we just apply across the board as counseling. And then if I want to use the dietitian or if I want to use the music therapist, like it's just easier to just do the application, and they'll both give $2,500. You need to apply. Do not share this presentation with anyone, please. Because what am I going to say next? You apply for both at the same time. So I'm a real stickler about this. If you're going to apply for CKNW and Variety, you apply because it's the same documentation that you have to provide as attachments. And then it asks a question, have you ever applied for therapy with anyone else? Or have you received funding from anyone else? So I always answer no, because then you're being honest. So you're putting both application in at the same time. If you put in a CKNW and then 6 months later you run out of the funding and then you put in Variety and they're going to say no because you already got CKNW.
Yeah.
And it's the same amount of paperwork. And it's really hard to get parents to get the paperwork together. So, and then I also, what Shannon will teach you is that you actually do the paperwork. We learned a long time ago, we can't get parents to do it because they are, sometimes they have learning disabilities themselves. They're totally stressed. They might have 2 special needs kids. They don't have time to be filling out paperwork and they're totally like overwhelmed. So we just do it. Basically, we ask them, you might even bring them into a session and do the paperwork with them right then and there, get them to sign. And then it's almost like I've made it so simple. It's all templated, like it's super easy. And that's what Shannon will show you. So $2,500 for each child. So that's $5,000. And that's say potentially they have extended health of $500 a year. And there's a family of 4, right? It's family therapy. So there's another 500 times 4. So that's 2,000. So now you have just found $7,000 of funding for your child, right? Which would make them be able to come maybe once a week or every second week. And then they get to participate in music therapy or speech therapy or dietitian or whatever.
Mhm.
It takes a long time for the approval to come through, usually 6 to 8 months. So that's the other thing. If you get any of these kiddos that already have funding, then you need to be on the ball. It's your job as
Yeah.
the associate to make sure that the renewals are done in advance, like 6 months in advance. And your job as an associate, as a paid associate, to make sure that the funding is like, you know, you can't abuse the funding, like use it all up, you know, and then not like say that the child needs to come long term and then you like see them twice a week and use up the funding in 6 months and then like what, you know, leave the child in alert. So it's about managing that funding and like putting a plan together to make sure that you basically a budget, and I'll help you with that. So, you know, we'll look at what the client has and then we'll create a plan, right? Just like you would create a conceptualization plan, we have to put a plan in terms of budgeting how we use these dollars.
Wicked. Thank you.
Okay. So in this slide here, it talks about you can use it for tutoring, speech and language, social activities, counseling's covered, a whole bunch of stuff. A lot of people have like behavioral teams, so it could be, you know, maybe an accountant to pay income tax, blah, blah, blah. You can get some equipment, but why would we? Okay, so like I'll have people that like parents be like, oh, can you sign these forms to get equipment? Well, I can, but why would I do that? Because then you're going to give that money to another supplier, right? If the kid's not going to use all the money, then yeah, but you know, do you see the conflict of interest? Right? If the child has 6,000 and then the mom's like, oh, can you buy me a computer for 4,000? And then you only have 2,000 left. It's kind of like, I'm like, I still will do it. But like, if you look at it from a financial business perspective, then that means you've ate up 4,000. And then the mom's going to come and say, only have 2,000. Can you please discount your services? So if any parents ever ask you to sign off, just say, oh, the big boss has to do it and send it my way. And then I'll make a decision. And then it's my license too. That's on that paperwork. So we would have a discussion about it, but just be cognizant. Parents will often ask you to do that. That's what I just talked about there. That's the computers and the touchscreen tablets. So the next slides, and I kind of talked about this already, and it's basically the Langley Child Development Center. So they help between infant birth up to about 3 years. But they actually, so they do that, and then they do the supported child development from 3 to 19. So Caitlin and Emmeline are still getting some money from them every year. Every month they get $250 in respite. So they don't actually cut them off, you know, they will cut them off soon. And then here are some of the therapies and stuff that they offer. They don't actually offer it in-house, they just refer out. So that's another thing is like, yeah, like they say on the website, they have all this, but all they do is just refer out. Right. So it's just basically like a referral center, but they are a hub. They are a first line of defense to help people get services. So the next thing I want to talk about is school-based resources. So probably Loretta, this would fall under you. Desiree certainly falls under you. And you're probably very familiar with IEPs. So once they get into school age, you are entitled to have an IEP. There are certain diagnoses that now they're refusing to do IEPs for. One would be ADHD, they're no longer doing it, and for gifted. So that's challenging because those, you know, how many kids do we know that have those diagnoses? So that's very unfortunate. One of the things that we love to do here, Shannon Lawrence and Nadine do it a lot, is go into the schools, and you as the counselor can be the advocate for the child and be part of those resource-based teams. It works great now because we're on Zoom. Before, you'd have to take like a half morning off, right, to go to the school. So I highly encourage you to be part of those teams and to be the voice for that child and to be the voice for the parent. Because how many times do I see, you know, when I was meeting with parents with the school district and they're like, I see their IEP goals and there's like 2, right? Like there should be more than 2. Or they'll say to the parent, oh, well, that child, Johnny, doesn't really need to have whatever goal. And then I'll like kick the parent under the table, say, no, right? So the reason why in an IEP, when you create goals, an IEP is a legal document. And so what that means is that the government says that whatever goals are put in that IEP, that means they need to be supported with resources, right? With time, money. And so that's why they try to make the IEPs really short, because then they don't have to put support behind the IEP. But every parent has a legal right to have the accommodations for their child's needs met. And so putting a robust IEP in place is difficult and challenging because they try to make it. And I don't know why every year they redo the IEP system. So I think, quite honestly, it actually saves them a lot of money, because by the time they retrain everybody on the new IEP system, well, like my kids didn't get an IEP until March this year. What's the point? School's over in June. So they're very, very important. And if you guys can be part of that, and you bill for it, right? So when you attend for that hour and you zoom in, then you bill for that session. So that's a great resource for your kiddos and for your families. You're supposed to get speech therapy in school. We talked about that. You're supposed to get OTPT. I asked for a referral. It took 4 months to get it from Madison. You're supposed to get SEA support. In the city of Surrey, you actually can get behavioral interventionists. Langley doesn't offer that. You can get a referral to a school psychologist. My numbers are a little bit off, but I'm throwing this out here. It's like 1 school psychologist for every 493 kids. So only the worst of the worst get seen. Anyway, that's the model that we work in. Resource teacher support, reading, math club, after school activities. Sometimes big brothers, big sister programs are in the schools, after school care programs. So the Langley Child Development Center will provide support. So that's the after school daycares. If they come in and do an assessment, then they might provide some funding dollars towards having a support worker. And then there's also like Easter Seal and summer camps, and I've done some other, different schools, different communities have different resources. So I'm going to move on to private assessments. So basically, some schools, well, you can ask for a psycho ed for the school district to do it. It's years, and you're on a waiting list for years. They typically do them in grade 3 and then in grade 8. But I highly recommend that you go outside, because when you have control, because you get to decide so private assessment, you can do psycho ed, you can do autism, ADHD, oppositional defiance disorder, anxiety, but you have control over whether you decide to give that report to the school. Whereas if the school does it, and they don't do all of them, but they do some of them, then it gets shared, right? And so of course the idea is that they do them in-house and they put resources and support behind it. So it was interesting because I had Madison done, she had an FASD and a psycho ed done in grade 3, and she scored quite low in a lot of different areas. And I had a wonderful principal when she was in grade 7 last year. We talked about maybe doing another psycho ed with the school district for grade 8. And she's like, don't do it. Because Madison, they had done such amazing work. The school really cared about her, and wonderful teachers and SEAs that were with her for years. And if they had done another psycho ed, then actually her funding would have been decreased. So private assessments range, hold on one sec. Hi, okay, you got it, you're in charge? Yeah. I'm just doing my presentation, just work away, Chris. My husband's the maintenance manager, he's here. What was I saying?
I have a question, Lisa.
Yeah.
So are SLPs only for children with a diagnosis?
Pretty much, because you'd have to have a referral.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
All right, and then-
Also, in schools in Surrey, SLP is consult only. They don't actually provide therapy. So they consult with the school team, like the teacher and the EA, with strategies. Is that with Langley too?
They do, but I would say that's what they're moving towards, yeah, because there's basically no support, very little support.
Yeah.
So they range, right? They range in cost, but you're probably looking at a couple $1,000s for each of those tests, and up to 5,000. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. I'll give you some referral sources. Oh, here we go. So Able Development, they're amazing because there is a lot of wait lists. There's like 4 different sites, but they're so like when I had Cable, when I did his ADHD, and when I did the girls autism, they were creative in their accounting. They're like Crossroads creative. So they would bill some session under mom, some session under dad, and then the child. And so, but if you were to actually send an invoice out for a psycho ed and it was like one bill for 3,000, the insurance companies will deny it. But if you bill out 1 hour under each family person's name as psychological services, then it's paid for. If you have a child and it's like, you know, the fall, then it's really good if you hold on one sec. You can come in here. Okay. If they do them in October, then you can split it over a calendar year. So let's say somebody gets $500 per person per year for psychological services. And then they do like the initial parent interview in November, and then they assess the child in December. That goes under, say, 2021. And then they actually do the results and the parent interview in 2022. There's a good chance the whole thing will be paid. It's about a 6 month wait list minimum. Surrey's way more wait list, so that you maybe want to go out to West Van. So basically the big ones are Able, Wishing Star, West Coast Development. That's that Dr. Warling that I told you about earlier, who told about the 5% statistic. Dr. Quee, he is Janelle Quee's husband, who's the head of Trinity Master Counseling Program. He's okay. The Asante Center, she's amazing. But my hands down Able, just because of that creative accounting stuff. That's who I would recommend. Okay. I can talk to you much more about that, but maybe we can do one-on-ones on about assessments, because I could talk for an hour on that. So what's really important is that once you get a diagnosis, you get something called the child tax disability credit. And so basically the government says, okay, we recognize that you have a child and you need extra help, and we don't provide the services to help you because we slashed all the funding and closed all the centers. So we'll give you a baby bonus. I'm using a baby bonus. I'm like, I'm born to a baby boomer. So baby bonus is like, it's like that money that you get from the government as parents every month. It's like a little stipend that they give you, and the more kids you have and the less money you make, they give you more money. You guys know what I'm talking about? All right. So basically it's a jump. So just to give you an example, Chris had 3 special needs kiddos and he got about $2,200 a month. So it's a substantial amount of money. For a parent, it'll bump. I mean, again, if you make $100,000 a year, you're getting nothing, even if you have 3 special needs kids. That's why people who have special needs kids don't work, or they are separated or have maintained 2 separate residents, don't get married, because you can't. If you did that, then you wouldn't get any of the funding. But once you get a diagnosis like autism, Down syndrome, something like that, like you get it pretty easily. I have tried to apply for ADHD kids. It's really hard. You have to really like do a huge rationale. So what happens is you fill out the disability paperwork, and then it goes to the government, and they have their own doctor that's paid to try and not give it to you. So you have to make sure the paperwork's filled out properly. If you have a kiddo that gets that or is on the cusp, come and see me and I'll teach you how to fill out that paperwork, like how to tell the parent how to fill it out. Even the doctors don't know how to fill it out. So basically, or I'll tell you to book in with Shannon Lawrence. So I've trained Shannon Lawrence how to do it, and she has been successful in making those applications. So again, some of them, boom, you get it right away. It's the, the spectrum ones that you don't. So this actually has changed. I say 12,000 now, it's gone up to 13,000. So basically, okay, let's pretend that you made $50,000 a year. So you get taxed on 50,000. If you have a child with a special needs that's approved for this program, minus $13,000 of income, that means you only get taxed on 37,000 of income per year. So that's a substantial savings, right? In terms of what you pay in income tax. Oh, look at that. I didn't even realize I had the example of 50,000. My math is right. So that's 8%, right? You're getting 8% savings. So that is superbly important. I just go on there with more information on that. These are all the diagnoses that supposedly you're supposed to get, like ADHD. Yeah, see, it's there. ADHD is there, but really hard to get. Anyway, it's still worth trying, but if you have somebody come see me and I'll show you how to do that, because it's not complicated. It's basically sitting down with the client and then like coming up with a ton of examples of why a kid with ADHD, how their life is difficult, how you have to have support, okay, then this is now called something we still all call it childcare subsidy funding, but it is the CRA. It's part of the child tax benefit, but basically the government is funding daycares right now. So if you have a child with a diagnosis, as long as you make less than 40,000 per year, well, actually, no, it's changed now. It's like a sliding scale. You can get $150 per month above. So let's say you have a typical child. So the government is giving funding towards daycare. So you can apply and you get it. But if you get approved, then you can apply for the special needs one and you get $150 more. So my kids still get it. They got it up until grade 11. Then again, I guess they figure grade 12, but they don't need a babysitter, but they still do. And I have again all these application forms in that binder that I showed you about. I don't believe this table has changed very much, but there's some information in terms of what they actually give. So it's different amounts for licensed group care, family in the home, out of the home, preschool, depending on the age. On average, I think Chris was getting with the 4 kids, he got about $2,000 a month. And now I think it's dropped down to like $377 a month. Okay, we talked about the Variety Club and the CKNW funding already. Okay, so this is the fun part. So some people, you love me or hate me, right? Whether it be personally or professionally. I have an amazing math mind. I'm very analytical. I have ADHD, and so if I could find a way to get money for Chris for his kids, I found it. And so this is sort of what I want to show you, how powerful it is that you're educated if you can advocate for your kiddos. So your child is diagnosed with any of the diagnoses in the previous slides. You pay Dr. Warling to do an assessment because parents don't want to pay for the assessment. But if they get the diagnosis, then they get the funding. So, and if there ever is somebody that we really believe should get a diagnosis, but they can't afford it, then please come and see me and we will work out some kind of payment plan with the parents and maybe pay for it on their behalf. And if they get the diagnosis, then they'll pay us back. Okay. So we will always do that. And we have done it in the past. So you pay Dr. Warling $2,500. You did the assessment in December, and so you're going to get that $3,000 credit. Remember we talked about that, the 8%. So it's a $3,000 credit on your income tax. So you're about $600 ahead already. Then you put the therapy. Then you want the following therapies in place. You want speech therapy for $2,500 a year. Behavioral interventionist for $4,000 a year. A consultant for $2,000 a year. Tutoring for $2,000. So you need $8,500. That's your plan. That's your therapy plan. So now you get $2,500 from Variety Club for speech. This presentation isn't for this clinic. I'm just saying in general, right? Variety Club gives you $2,000 and CKNW. In this case, in the year that I did this presentation, Variety Club gave 2 pockets of money. They don't anymore. CKNW gives you $2,000. Variety Club, which is President's Choice, they'll give you $5,000 over a 3-year period. So that's $1,600 a year. Respite, I talked very briefly about Respite, but basically MCFG will give about $230 a month. So that's $2,700 a year. And then you get your childcare subsidy. I just used $300 per year. So now how much money do you have? You got $19,000. Right? All those different programs that I just spent an hour with you going over, by getting a diagnosis, you can have access to all of this. And so that is the way the government intended it to work, right? That's what all these programs are in place for. But if I didn't tell you about those, if I didn't spend 3 years chasing these little pellets of funding, I wouldn't know about this. And that's the reason why I'm presenting this presentation to you, is that you need to advocate for the kids that you work with and help their parents. And you know where this starts? it starts with you convincing them to get a private assessment. Right? Without that. So I had little, I'll talk about little Alex, and mom was having lots of challenges. She came to me, she was my first client. She saw me on Facebook. It was like my $60 client, the mom. And then I met little Alex, and I was like, for sure. But I was just a new counselor, right? I only knew what I knew based on my own kids and my experience. I'm not a teacher, nothing. And I knew that Alex had autism, and but mom, low income, single mom, she didn't have the money. And but then I started getting involved in the school IEPs, and I attended the meetings, and I got him lots of support. And then like 3 years later, like he continued, Alex came, I got him, we did some free services, low cost counseling. And then he actually went on to see Shannon Lawrence. And so last year, so I remember I started this process like 3 years ago. Last year, mom finally asked we actually offered the mom to pay for it as Crossroads because we were so sure he had it. And then mom borrowed the money from her mom last year, and I like was so happy. She came in to the collective. She's like, he has autism. And I'm like, I know he has autism, but that's 3 years later. 3 years later, because she didn't have the money to get him assessed. I can tell you 3 to 4 stories of those first clients that I had that just got their diagnosis as recently. So it makes me happy that yes, we got them the support, but I just wish that, I guess I couldn't advocate strong enough because I had a hunch. It was based on a hunch, and they didn't have the money. So yeah, I think that's, what you really have to do is to help parents, and let's go back to the beginning of this presentation when we talk about the grief, right? Acknowledging that your child, a big part of it is that the parent doesn't want to acknowledge that there could be something wrong with their child. Who wants to say that I have a child with autism, right? That they going to have challenges their whole life. So, or perhaps mom knows that there's a behavioral issue or a learning disability, but dad won't agree to do it. So, there's lots of different things out there that, can prevent a family. Not only does it have the financial, but it could be just cultural norms and biases and fear, right? So that is the end of my presentation. Do you guys have any questions for me? I'm going to stop sharing here so I can see your faces. There you all are.
If someone was paying out of pocket for services and then they got a diagnosis, is there any retroactive way of reimbursing anything that was paid up until that point?
Nope. Great question. You kind of knew the answer already though, didn't you?
I had a hunch.
No, unfortunately not. Did you find this presentation valuable?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I am going to have the recording, so I can send the recording out. I'll send you the backup slides. I think that manual, I actually PDF'd it all. So I think I have it all. So I can try emailing it to you or sending it on your OneDrive. And if not, then you can just bring your computer next time. We can hook it up to OneDrive and just transfer it over because they're pretty big files. Don't send the presentation to anyone without my permission, because I did speak kind of I probably said some things that I shouldn't have in this presentation. If you know what I mean, I may not want it to get into some people's hands. But again, that's my personal truth.
I have a question, Lisa.
Yeah.
So just as for Crossroads, do you have any outside agencies or MCFD, let's say, that refer to you guys? Is there, or have you had some workers in the past that know of you guys that they've had other clients come to? Because I'm just thinking of I see a lot of this happening in schools, right? And unless somebody's able to come in for private counseling, there's a weird in between that.
Yeah, so I actually present this presentation every year. The Surrey School District invites me to their May Pro D Day.
Okay.
which you guys are not encouraged, well, SEAs are not always encouraged to attend. Like, it's weird the teachers attend. So I've done that presentation, word of mouth, but no, I wish that would be a dream, right? That'd be my dream. It's basically just through word of mouth, but people, what's interesting is that people are looking for us now. Like when we look at our SEO optimization, like I'm supposed to, like, when you Google counseling Langley, that's what's interesting with the marketing company we're working with. They're actually saying that we're getting like 300 hits a month of people actually looking up Crossroads. So I think what you're saying is people are starting to hear about us.
Yeah.
And the whole idea of our internship program is about having that low cost counseling. And so these are the people that are being referred would be these parents where the school districts or these teachers are like, they need help, right? And it's the parents who don't have the money that need the help. So yeah, I mean, if you guys can think of any ways, or as a project to get some intern hours, if you can think of ways to get our name out into schools or get this presentation out or get me to present. I also want to teach this presentation to Shannon so she can present. Yeah, that would be amazing, right? I've gotten quite a few referrals by doing this presentation.
Cool. I have, maybe I'll check in with you just later on, but my husband works for a program run by Douglas College that's called Autism CanTech.
Okay.
For folks on the spectrum, but they are older. So that's why I was just looking, maybe we'd be looking at like having to get funding through like Seeker and W or something like that.
Yeah, no, I don't know of any. Julia, Loretta?
I was gonna say, like, because I'm an integration teacher at school too, but I think integration teachers, as we start to go face to face, like maybe you can do like a meeting at one of our meeting days.
Yeah,
I
love
think
to.
it'd be
I would love
really
to.
helpful to see what parents go through, because we see it on the school side.
Yeah.
What happens when they come in already. So it's good to know what happens getting the parents there. And I think all the new integration teachers should know about this. So
Yeah, so when I do the school district presentation, it's all the ICT teachers that are attending.
yeah, I think I attended one of yours.
Oh, cool.
Super familiar, and I'm like, I think she's that counselor that came. And so it was you.
Was it in person?
It was. You went to Johnson Heights one
Yes.
year.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's cool. Yeah,
Yeah, it was you.
awesome. Sorry, it's a repeat.
No, it's good. Oh, it's always good.
It's a refresher, and my perspective is different because it's 5 years later,
Definitely.
right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, if nobody else has any other questions, then like I said, reach out to me. If anything, you want more training on anything that I talked about today, we can schedule supervision one-on-one or just a meeting, or I'll connect you. But yeah, this is just sort of a sampler. And then anything else that you want to talk about, or 4 months from now, you see this client, you're like, Lisa talked about that. So just come back to me and we'll see what we can do for these kids and for the parents and for the siblings, right? Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, ladies. I'm sorry I was sick last week. Please tell everybody how great this presentation was, and I can do it again.
Great. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right, guys. Okay. Bye.